Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking a stack of your sources, specifically a really deeply researched retrospective column from Monumental Movement Records.
Right, MMR.
Yeah, MMR. And we're using it to answer one, really crucial question.
And it's a big one.
It is. How did a furiously independent, anti-corporate rap trio from the 1990s essentially write the code for the next 30 years of experimental hip-hop?
It's just wild.
We are bringing you a custom deep dive into Company Flow because they were short-lived, deliberately abrasive, and I love this. Instead of just wanting a piece of the music industry's corporate pie, they wanted to flip the entire table over.
They really did. I mean, it is a phenomenal story to dig into, especially when you consider the backdrop.
The 90s, right?
Yeah, think about the late 1990s visual and sonic aesthetic in mainstream rap. It was this moment of unprecedented commercial expansion.
Oh, totally. The shiny suit era.
Exactly. We were talking shiny suits, massive million-dollar music video budgets, champagne on yachts.
Puff Daddy, Bad Boy Records, all that.
Right. And beats built entirely on recognizable, feel-good 1980s pop samples.
Yeah.
Hip-hop had officially become this global, multi-million-dollar corporate industry driven by massive machines like Bad Boy.
But anytime a cultural movement swings that hard toward glossy, frictionless commercialism, a shadow is cast. And in that shadow, a counter-reaction starts brewing. So Company Flow, which was made up of LP, Bigg Jus, and DJ Mr. Len, they were that reaction.
They absolutely were.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand Company Flow, we have to look at the soil they grew out of. If they weren't trying to get on MTV, what world were they operating in?
Well, to find them, you have to look away from the glittering Manhattan skyscrapers of the late 90s and go deep into the boroughs, specifically Brooklyn around 1993.
Right, totally different vibe.
Night and day. The underground ecosystem of New York at that time was entirely separate from the mainstream machinery. It was incredibly physical.
Physical how? Out in the streets?
Yeah, intensely localized, fiercely competitive. You had physical spaces like the legendary Lyricist Lounge, which was this open mic incubator where raw, unpolished talent would just, battle and test out rhymes.
Wow. And the distribution was completely different too, right? I mean, it wasn't about getting a slick music video on television.
Far from it. The lifeblood of the underground was the indie 12-inch vinyl culture.
That's pressing records yourself?
Yeah. Artists would scrape together cash to press maybe a few hundred records, load them into the trunk of a car, and physically walk them into local record shops to sell hand-to-hand.
That is just such a grind.
It was. And above all, you had the Stretch and Bobbito college radio show.
Oh, legendary.
Right. If you managed to get your homemade cassette tape played on their late-night broadcast, you officially existed in the underground.
That was the stamp of approval.
It really was.
Yeah.
And that was the fertile ground where a teenage LP, who was also known as El Producto, he was already meticulously building beat cassettes in his bedroom. And he linked up with MC Bigg Jus. Shortly after, they brought in DJ Mr. Len, completing the trio.
Which brings us to the first thing that really stands out to me from the MMR piece.
Yeah.
Mainstream rap at the time was like a slick corporate blockbuster movie, right? Focus grouped, heavily funded, designed to be universally liked by everyone.
Mass appeal.
But Company Flow, immediately upon forming, was like a gritty, self-funded indie thriller shot on grainy 16mm film. They just didn't want the major label money.
No, they didn't. And what's fascinating here is that they weren't just making music. They were establishing a philosophy of absolute artist autonomy that fundamentally defied the era's commercial trends.
It was about more than the songs.
Right, it was an ideology. They knew that if a major label handed you a massive advance, that money came with a leash.
Oh, always.
The label would dictate what samples you could use, what your single should sound like, and ultimately, and this is the big one, they would own the master recordings.
Hold on, I want to push back on that for a second.
Sure.
Just playing devil's advocate here. If you are a broke teenager in Brooklyn, you're grinding in the underground, and an executive offers you a life-changing check, why on earth do you say no?
It's a fair question.
Isn't the point of grinding to eventually, make a living off your art?
Making a living, yes, but not at the cost of the art itself. Company Flow looked at the major label system and saw a machine designed to dilute their message.
So it's about compromise.
Exactly. They believe that the moment you compromise your sound to please a corporate A&R rep, you lose the very friction that makes your art valuable in the first place.
Wow, okay.
So, to ensure that autonomy, they bypassed the system entirely. In 1995, they pooled their own money and created their own independent label right out of the gate, which they called Official Recordings.
Printing your own label to release your debut. I mean, that is such a bold, confident move.
It was a massive gamble. But through Official Recordings, they released their 1995 single, Juvenile Techniques.
And how did the underground react?
Oh, because the underground scene, those record shops, the college radio stations we talked about, they were so starved for something authentic and unvarnished. That single just caught fire.
It proved the model worked?
Yes, it proved definitively that you did not need a corporate backer to make noise in New York.
Okay, so they have the philosophy, they have the independence, and they have the attention of the streets. But obviously, because they refused major label money, they couldn't afford polished, high-end studio sessions.
Right, they had practically no budget.
So they had to turn their lo-fi bedroom reality into an intentional aesthetic. And what that uncompromised vision sounded like was, well, the source material calls it industrial boom-bap.
Yeah, and the sound was just revolutionary. In 1996, they dropped the Funcrusher EP on their own label. It made such a monumental impact that it caught the ear of Rawkus Records. Now, Rawkus at the time was the absolute epicenter of New York's independent underground.
Oh, yeah, they had huge names.
Right, boasting rising stars like Mos Def and Talib Kweli. So Company Flow signs a deal with Rawkus that allows them to keep their creative control. And in 1997, they dropped the expanded full-length album Funcrusher Plus.
The classic.
Yeah. The sonic architecture of this project completely shifted the landscape of hip-hop.
Okay, I need you to explain this to me like I'm 5. Because traditional boom bap is that classic 90s New York sound, right? A heavy kick drum, a crisp snare, usually some warm jazz or soul loop over it. It's designed to make you nod your head. It's a comfortable groove.
Yeah, feels good.
So how exactly did LP turn that into something industrial? What were the actual mechanics behind this sound?
Well, it all comes down to how LP deliberately abused the hardware he was using.
Abused it.
Yeah. The backbone of 90s rap production was the EMU SP1200 drum machine. The SP1200 naturally has a very low sampling rate. It processes audio at 12-bit resolution.
Okay, what does 12-bit mean for the listener? I'm not a tech guy.
Think about taking a pristine, high-definition digital photograph and then deliberately saving it as a low-resolution JPEG over and over until the pixels get chunky, blocky, and distorted.
Oh, like deep frying an image.
Exactly. That is what the SP1200 does to sound. It inherently adds this layer of metallic grit.
Fascinating.
But while other producers tried to smooth that grit out with, warm bass lines, LP leaned into it. Instead of warm, echoing drums, his kicks and snares were incredibly dry and sharp.
So they punch right through.
They hit the listener like a physical punch because there's almost no audio decay or reverb to soften the blow.
Wow. So he was actively stripping the comfort out of the mix?
Completely. And then there was his use of the MPC sampler. Traditional hip-hop production usually involved finding a nice, recognizable 2-bar loop of an old James Brown or funk record and just letting it ride.
Right, loop it and rap over it.
But LP didn't do that. He would take a sample, chop it into microscopic fractions of a second, assign those tiny audio fragments to different pads on the MPC, and then play them out of order.
That sounds chaotic.
It was. The result was these jagged, off-kilter, incredibly dense rhythms that felt chaotic but were actually mathematically precise. And he layered that with minimalistic, eerie, futuristic synthesizers.
Which is such a wild artistic choice. Because music is generally designed to seek resolution and harmony. We are biologically wired to enjoy things that sound pleasant.
Right.
Company Flow purposefully chose dissonance. It reminds me of the analogy I used earlier, but let's take it a step further.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine LP is a rogue mechanic. You give him a pristine, comfortable luxury car. Instead of driving it, he completely guts it. He takes the engine apart piece by piece and uses those high-end parts to weld together a menacing, post-apocalyptic dune buggy.
Oh, I love that.
It uses the same core components, drums, samples, synths, but the intent is aggressive, not luxurious.
The dune buggy analogy captures the exact intent. The final mix on Funcrusher Plus, reinforced by DJ Emily Len's surgical abrasive scratching, created an environment where tension was prioritized over comfort.
Tension over comfort.
They wanted you to feel a sense of unease. The music wasn't inviting you to a party to pop champagne. It was demanding your absolute undivided attention.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because you can't just put that kind of harsh, tension-filled, jagged beat under typical 90s rap lyrics about going to the club or wearing shiny suits.
No, it wouldn't fit at all.
The ideas layered on top of those beats had to match the paranoia of the sound.
And they absolutely did. The lyrics elevated the entire project. The MMR column provides a deep dive into a standout track from the album called The Fire in Which You Burn.
Ah, yes.
This song is widely considered the quintessential company flow track because it marries that dissonant 12-bit sound design with some of the most dense, prophetic lyrics of the decade.
Now, before we dig into the specific themes of this track, it's fascinating to unpack these lyrics. And just to be clear to you listening, we're exploring this strictly as a historical and artistic analysis of the MMR column.
Right, purely analytical.
We aren't endorsing any specific political ideology, left or right. We're simply observing how these artists translated their socio-political anxieties into art. And what's wild is how far ahead of the curve they were in predicting the anxieties we all live with today.
It's eerie. Looking at those ideas objectively, what is remarkable is how far outside the standard hip-hop narrative they were operating.
They weren't doing standard street tales.
Not at all. LP and Bigg Jus wrapped in complex abstract metaphors. In The Fire in Which You Burn, they were exploring concepts of hacker culture, the rise of the surveillance society, information manipulation, and the very real dangers of technology merging with centralized power structures.
Which feels like looking into a crystal ball.
Yeah.
They're talking about mass data manipulation and a surveillance state in 1997.
Yes.
This is decades before the smartphone was invented, long before social media algorithms, before most people even had a dial-up internet connection in their living rooms.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, they saw the corporate consolidation of the music industry in the 90s as a microcosm for the corporate consolidation of human information.
Wow, that's deep.
They believed that the same corporate machines trying to control what you listen to would eventually try to control what you think.
And the sound reflects that.
It does. The genius of the track is how the sound design perfectly mirrors that exact paranoia. You have this low, groaning bass line that sounds almost subterranean, like something lurking beneath the floorboards.
Give you chills.
Yeah, and the MPC chop percussion we discussed earlier feels intentionally cold and isolating. The sonic environment makes you feel the exact anxiety and claustrophobia they're rapping about.
It's an immersive experience in paranoia. So they put out this masterpiece of underground rebellion on Rawkus Records. It's incredibly successful.
Hugely successful.
It establishes them as the undisputed kings of the New York independent scene. But success is a double-edged sword. What happens when a fiercely anti-corporate group finds themselves on a label that is suddenly growing exponentially?
Massive ideological friction happens, that's what. By 1998 and into 1999, Rawkus Records was scaling up rapidly.
They were getting big.
Very big. They were gaining significant market share, putting out hit records, and naturally they started seeking major capital and distribution deals to compete with the heavyweights. They were transitioning from an indie underdog to a major player in the music business.
Wait, hold on. I need to understand their thought process here. They spend years building up Rawkus to be this massive indie powerhouse, and the second it starts succeeding and bringing in real capital, they just walk away.
Yeah, they walked.
Isn't that shooting themselves in the foot? Why not take the major distribution and use it to spread their anti-corporate message to a much wider audience?
Because for company flow, the medium was the message. Taking major distribution meant giving up a percentage of their masters, giving up a degree of control, and ultimately becoming a cog in the very machine that we're critiquing in songs like The Fire in Which You Burn.
So they wouldn't compromise.
Never. Staying true to their core values of absolute artist autonomy, they refused to compromise. They made the incredibly difficult choice to leave Rawkus Records, walking away from the very platform they helped build into a powerhouse.
That is the definition of putting your money where your mouth is. Or, I guess, walking away from the money entirely to protect the art.
Exactly. And to further prove their commitment to uncompromising experimentation, their next move in 2000 was an album called Little Johnny from the Hospital. But here's the twist that shocked everyone. It was a fully instrumental album.
I'm sorry, they removed the rappers. The group known for these incredibly dense, prophetic, hyper-lyrical songs just drops the vocals entirely.
Completely gone.
Why would they do that?
To prove they weren't bound by any rules, not even the ones they wrote themselves. There were no vocals, no traditional DJ shouts to hype up the tracks. It was just LP's production pushed to its absolute breaking point.
Just raw sound.
Yeah, it was highly complex, leaning heavily into harsh electronic elements, mixing lo-fi grit with hi-fi synthesis. It was a statement that they were artists first, unconstrained by any expectations of what a rap album had to be, even in the underground.
But shortly after that instrumental album, the group splinters. By 2001, Company Flow goes on an indefinite hiatus, which brings up a really crucial question for me and probably for you listening right now.
Okay, what is it?
If Company Flow only really existed as an active trio for a few short years, and they put out a fraction of the music that major artists do, why are we dedicating a whole deep dive to them? Why does this retrospective column from MMR hold them up as such a monumental pillar of music history?
Because their legacy isn't measured in the quantity of their albums, but in the massive seismic ripple effect of their ideology and their sound. Let's trace the lineage.
Okay, let's do it.
When Company Flow disbanded, LP didn't stop. He took the exact DIY independent blueprint they had forged and founded his own legendary label, Definitive Jux, or Def Jux, in 2000.
Oh man, Def Jux basically defined 2000s underground hip-hop.
It absolutely did. LP produced absolute classics there, like Cannibal Ox's album The Cold Vein, which took that gritty industrial boom-bap sound into even colder, more futuristic territory.
Such a good album.
He worked with incredibly dense lyricists like Aesop Rock. He proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you could build a sustainable, highly influential empire entirely outside the major label system. He owned the masters, he controlled the art, and it worked.
And his influence didn't just stay in the 2000s underground, did it?
Not at all. Fast forward to 2013, and LP teams up with Atlanta rapper Killer Mike to form Run the Jewels.
Which is just massive.
Run the Jewels achieves massive, unprecedented global success. We're talking playing sold-out arenas, performing at massive festivals worldwide, but doing it with that exact same independent, uncompromising spirit LP forged in 1995.
It all comes back to that ethos.
And that immense mainstream success with Run the Jewels triggered a massive, critical reevaluation of Company Flow. People trace the sonic DNA back to the source.
It's like finding the missing evolutionary link. When you listen to the aggressive, noisy, experimental hip-hop of the last decade or so, artists who use distortion, screaming synthesizers, and dissonance as weapons, you can draw a direct line back to LP chopping up samples on his 12-bit SP1200.
The MMR column points this out explicitly. The sonic foundation LP built paved the way for groups like Dalek, Clipping, and Death Grips decades later.
Wow, Death Grips, really?
Oh, yeah. These are artists who shatter the boundaries of what rap can sound like, incorporating harsh noise, punk, and industrial elements. Company Flow gave permission to an entire generation of producers to stop trying to make their beats sound pretty.
So what does this all mean? When we look at this relatively brief, incredibly noisy chapter in music history, what is the ultimate takeaway from the MMR deep dive?
The core takeaway is that Company Flow proved indie hip-hop wasn't just a budget constraint. Before them, being underground usually just meant you couldn't afford a real studio yet. It was a waiting room for a major label deal.
Right, you were just waiting to get signed.
But Company Flow turned the underground into a deliberate, powerful ideology. They established it not as a stepping stone on the way to the mainstream, but as a righteous, valid destination in itself.
And that is exactly why this matters to you today, regardless of whether you even listen to hip-hop. Think about the media environment we live in right now.
It's everywhere.
Everything feels packaged, focus grouped, and commodified to maximize engagement. We are constantly fed content that is designed to be as frictionless as possible. Company Flow is a masterclass in the value of an uncompromising creative vision.
Absolutely.
They remind us that sometimes true art requires friction. It requires pushing back against the comfortable and the expected. They were the gritty indie thriller that absolutely refused to let the corporate studio change their script.
This raises an important question, though, and it leaves us with a fascinating paradox to consider. Company Flow fought fiercely against corporate music monopolies in the 1990s. The major labels, the executives in shiny suits to protect their autonomy. And in many ways, they won their battle for independence. But looking at today's music landscape, did that fierce DIY spirit actually win the war? Or did artists and listeners alike just willingly surrender to the ultimate invisible corporate machine, the streaming algorithm? Have we simply traded the executives in suits for a line of code that dictates what we hear?
That is a heavy, profound question. The physical executives with their contracts might be gone from the underground, but the digital system we all rely on might be more rigid and controlling than ever.
Something to think about.
And maybe that's exactly the kind of invisible, surveillance-level control they were warning us about in their lyrics back in 1997. We will leave you to mull that one over. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the noisy, brilliant minds of Company Flow. Until next time, keep digging beneath the surface.